Yogananda would tell us the star in the east. Yogananda said the forehead was the east in the body. And the wise men, who were not kings, but they were Zoroastrian priests, and they were very good at astrology, and they knew a divine incarnation was being born. And so, with great self-effort and expense and tapasya, they went out to seek the birth of the Christ on earth, the birth of divinity on earth. And they followed, they had the wisdom to be gazing up, to be following that inner star. And they could do that because they were wise, but they knew how to meditate. They knew how to gaze up. They knew how to see the inner light and follow the inner light, which is inner guidance from the divine, inner wisdom. And by following that, it led them west from where they were coming to Bethlehem, to where Jesus was born. And of course, Yogananda says it's impossible that you could have a star hanging over a particular stable on this earthly plane, because the star would always be further away as you got closer, or else the whole world would have come when they saw the star hanging over one little building. It wouldn't have just been some wise men and some shepherds. And so they had that inner guidance from the divine to come honor the birth of Christ. And Yogananda said, which is very interesting, he said in the presence of Swami Kriyananda that the three wise men were Babaji, Sri Yukteswar, and Lahiri Mahashaya. And so Swami was new on the path and was quite surprised at Yogananda saying that. And he said, well then, if those three gurus were the wise men, who was Christ? And Yogananda said, oh, what does it matter? So, we really have no idea how many times these avatars come onto this planet and help to guide us back to a true understanding of our divine origin. And they keep coming again and again. And we're practicing for the children's play that's coming up on the 25th, and we're practicing our songs that we'll be singing with it. And every one of the songs seems to have the word stillness in it. The Christ child's asleep, the silence is so deep, or silent night, holy night, and it all comes back to stillness. It's like in the stillness, the divine is perceived. In the stillness, Christ consciousness can be born within us. Kutastha Chaitanya can be born within us. But if we don't learn how to be still, and if we're never silent or still, how can God come to us? How can God be born in our hearts? And so the great ones, when they come, they teach us again and again, it's not all this outward thing. It looks like it's all this big outward life, but it's not. All of this is to teach you to go inside and to find my love and my joy and my light within you. And here, this is how you do it. So they give us these teachings. And, how to open that doorway at the spiritual eye to lead us to this infinite consciousness. What do they say? The masters say, go back to the breath. From the very first day of meditation, the breath. Get still and just watch the breath. Even to watch the breath, more or less, you have to sit still. Most of our day, we're just running everywhere. It's like, no, sit down, sit still, watch the breath. And so already we sit down. Okay, that's one level of being still, is just sitting still. And then watching our breath, that keeps moving. And so the breath is even restless a bit. But the more you keep watching it, they're saying this is the key. Because at the center of that movement is stillness. At the center of each breath is that pause that we try to enjoy and dive deep into. But the center of every movement in creation is that stillness. And I think for some of us, the very first time we feel that stillness at the center of our breath, maybe when we're practicing meditation, it's the first time we really feel peace. And the divine is born in us as peace, as light, as calmness, as joy. But all of that divine cannot be born in our heart unless we have that stillness to receive it. And so the first time it may be just a pause in between our breath, and then the pause may become longer. And then we learn to love the stillness. In the stillness we can remember who we are. In the stillness we can love our higher selves. We can love ourselves, the divine within ourselves. Christ came. All the, Yogananda came. These are avatars of divine love. They're trying to say, have a personal relationship with God. Love God. That longing for that love, for that oneness, will lead you to the star, will lead you to that peace that you're seeking, that light that you're seeking. And we need to take time to be still. Yes, we need a meditation practice where we sit still, but we also need to make stillness a priority in our life. There's about 14 of our congregation this weekend having a silent retreat for 48 hours from Friday afternoon until today afternoon, where they're not speaking, they're just quiet. They're meditating, they're studying, they're in seclusion. And Yogananda said, seclusion is the price of greatness. Without experiences of stillness and silence, we can't even remember who we are or what we're doing here. We need these. It's so easy to think that, even running a wonderful ashram like this is the point, but it's not the point. The point for all of us is to get still and to remember who we are, and then reflect that love and that light and that joy that the avatars come to share with us, to others. Because how can we be channels of light and joy and peace if we don't experience it within the stillness of our hearts? So Yogananda really, really helped us to understand, how Christ fits into our line of gurus. He's the one that came to Babaji and said, send a master to the West. Teach the Christians how to do inner communion. They have forgotten. They do lots of good works. They do lots of rituals, but they had forgotten. So Christ is actually the beginning of this amazing line of gurus. And he sort of started this, went to Babaji and said, please, send someone. And so this afternoon, or after the satsang, we'll also have a class on Yogananda's teachings of Christ's life. So I invite you all to join that also. And I'm so grateful to have Aryavan with us today. Keshav is in the U.S. for a week. He's back, I think, on Tuesday or Wednesday. So he sends his love.
I have always loved Christmas, the Christmas season. Growing up in the West, in America, Christmas is a really big deal, especially probably for kids, because it's a time when there's a lot of joy, a lot of celebration, and with celebration come presents. I think of it probably as very similar in a lot of ways to Diwali here. All the houses are decorated, everyone's in a festive mood, everyone's giving to others. And for a child, your awareness is a little bit more narrow. And so you often think about things in relationship to yourself. And so I remember, actually I don't really remember, my parents told me, I was only 4 or 5, but this is an example of the kind of enthusiasm that can come, and any of us who have kids or are around kids at these holidays know. I received a present from my uncle, and they all get arranged under the tree, and so I pulled it out and I unwrapped it furiously, and paper was going everywhere. And I just, with so much wonder in my voice, I said, oh, wow, it's so amazing. This is just what I've always wanted. Pause. What is it? I didn't even know, because I was caught up in the energy of the moment, which was a joyful celebration, and things were coming and gifts were being given. And I often wonder why it is that Christmas is so special for us there. We were watching a movie yesterday here at the center, The Grinch, which I had never seen before, but the story is one familiar to me. It's about I don't know what he is. He's different than everyone else, and how that manifests is he really does not like Christmas. And in this case, it was because he had always felt alone on Christmas, and so Christmas is a time generally where all of the stories that we tell are all about being together, about family. The example of Christ is one of a family becoming whole, two parents to be finally welcoming the child into their lives. And I noticed that even in this film that was they don't really talk about the spiritual side of Christmas much in these movies. It's mostly about family and about wholeness and things like that, which are very uplifting, but it's not talking about Christ. But I noticed that they said the word Christ in that film through the music probably a dozen times. They just kept saying Christ, Christ, Christ. And I think about what kind of vibration it takes to make an impact on a planet that's like that. When you think about the life, especially of Krishna and of Christ, Babaji was given the domain of the East to watch over spiritually. We learn in Autobiography of a Yogi, and Jesus Christ was given the West. And when you see, even now you watch a TV show in the US, and around Christmas time, they all take on a different theme. They all, they've been going on their way with whatever crazy stories and shenanigans that these characters can get into. But at Christmas, they take a little bit of a break from that. And they explore stories that are more personal, more inward, more sweet. They have miracles, things they would never talk about for the whole year. But at Christmas time, they talk about miracles. Now, I find that interesting in a number of ways because I think about sometimes pilgrimage places. We go to these places that are thousands of years old, and we're told that a great being was there. Ishani and I, with a group from Italy, had the joy of getting to visit Israel in last November. And I know many of you are going in this January, and I think you'll have a blessed time. And you go to the place in Bethlehem where supposedly Christ was born. And that was 2,000 years ago. How could we possibly know? Now, on one hand, we have a master who went to these places and actually told us that most of these places are genuine. But even when you don't have that and you go to these places, you feel a vibration there. You feel a deep stillness, a deep sweetness, a compassion like you can't imagine. And I think that even if the place was not the true place where Christ was born, you would still feel that. Why is that? For 2,000 years, people have been going to that spot and offering their devotion to the baby Jesus, to the baby Christ, to the light in themselves, offering it into the light of infinity. And that creates a vibration. And so even in the West, where many people have forgotten the deeper aspects of Christ's life and the lessons that we can learn there and the inner communion that Christ said was forgotten from his religion, we still get to feel Christ's presence in each other, in the vibration of even the air. I remember as a child, I loved Christmas again for the presents, and of course we would feast, we would eat lots of cookies, and I remember times when I was young when I would be literally bouncing off the walls from the amount of sugar I had imbibed. And this was the one time of year where my parents would let that slide, so I enjoyed it. But I also remember one particular service, Christmas Eve. And at that time, there's a tradition in Christianity to have a midnight mass. On Christmas Eve, you celebrate the exact moment when Christ was born by getting together and celebrating spiritually. And we would have that at Palo Alto. And it was such a beautiful ceremony. Of course, it was completely dark. It ended at midnight, so it was well into the night. And there were candles lit everywhere, and there was music, and there was so much. The only way I can think of it is pure sweetness. Christmas is such a magical time in many ways because it represents us tuning in to the pure sweetness of Christ, of God within us. A lot of times when we meditate, at least for me, I think about the light, I think about the spiritual eye, which is the true light within us, and I think about it as far away. We're encouraged to look off into a distant hill, and we can sometimes forget that hill is part of us. That's actually within us. All of this is within us. And so when we look out, we can't fall into the trap of thinking that God is outside of us. There's a tradition in the Bible, Jesus speaks of coming again. He says, I will come again, and we talk about the second coming of Christ. And there are many traditions of Christianity that believe he will literally come again. He will descend in human form, and he will come again. our guru talked about how that was actually an inner experience, an inner realization. But the truth is that Christ will not come again. Christ will never come to us because Christ is already as with us now as he will ever be. We've just forgotten. The clouds may block the sun for days and days and years, forever, but the sun is shining just as brightly. And the moment that those clouds break, the clouds of our indifference, the clouds of our distraction, the clouds of our anger or jealousy or fear, that sun shines upon us as brightly as it ever did. So the lesson of the birth of Christ for us, the metaphor there, is that we already have Christ. We're waiting for him to be born. And in our meditation and in our lives, in the way we treat each other, we can have Christ be born again inside of ourselves. We can reveal the Christ that lives at our spiritual eye, at the Kutastha, but is there as I speak, this moment. We are made from the very beginning of our inception. We are made with this light as fundamental to our being. We are made of that light. Everything else is put on top. Swamiji used to give the example that gold, even covered for millions of years by mud, the moment you wash off the mud, it shines as bright as ever. It almost gives off light. We are that gold. That gold doesn't even exist within you. It is you. Everything else is superficial. Everything else is put on top. So at this Christmas season, it's an opportunity for even people who aren't thinking in those ways to experience a touch of that light, of that joy. We sing songs that are inspiring to us. We tell stories of the shepherds coming and the kings coming, or the priests coming. And even as a child, we used to act these things out in a live action play, which actually you'll get to see if you come on Christmas. And I remember being a shepherd, and I found it, even as a child, very inspiring that the shepherds came first. In the story, there's a very particular order. The shepherds, the angels go and tell the shepherds, before the kings even arrive, that this great moment has happened. Light has been born anew on earth. And the shepherds, the simplest people of all, are the ones to come. God does not want us to be complex. If we think about the light inside of us complexly, okay, it's about 3 feet away and it's about this size. Even visualizing the spiritual eye, if it's helpful for you, you should do it. But sometimes it can be limiting to think of God in that way. Don't think of anything. Go before him with the simplicity of a child, with the simplicity of a shepherd. You have nothing to offer God because he wants nothing but your love. And he planted that love there. That's the irony. You're loving God with his love. So really, all we have to do, our only responsibility on this path, is to forget all of the things that sit on top. All of the self-definitions, all of the ideas of, oh, we have to go and reach God. God's far away and we have to climb the mountain to God. God isn't far away. God lives within you. God is you. Your consciousness is God. And the spirit of Christmas, this holiday season, is an opportunity to remember that. Joy to you.